I'm Alex, and I sell cheese for a living. As a cheesemonger and certified cheese professional, I have helped thousands of customers find their favorite cheese. Each episode, I'll share what I've learned from behind the counter as we dive into the vast, fascinating world of all things cheese. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about why the month of May is so special. May is celebrated as American Cheese Month, which is an initiative that highlights the diverse and rich world of artisan and specialty cheeses produced in North America. So today we're going to talk all about the story of American cheese, where it came from, how it evolved, and how the United States became one of the most influential cheese-making countries in the world. Not necessarily the oldest or the most traditional, but absolutely one of the most important. American cheese history is really a story about adaptation. If you look at immigrants who brought techniques from Europe, farmers who adapted them to new landscapes, and factories that industrialized them, and modern artisans who reinvent them every day over and over again. Today, American cheese exists in a strange and fascinating place where 100-year-old traditions sit right next to a lot of experimentation. And we're going to talk about some of the major eras of American cheese making, the people who shaped it, and the cheeses that were born right here in the United States. Before European settlers arrived, indigenous communities across North America already had highly developed food systems centered around preservation, fermentation, agriculture, hunting, and seasonal food storage. European-style cheesemaking was not part of those traditions. The broader understanding of preservation and food transformation absolutely existed long before colonization occurred. Once European settlers arrived in the 1600s, they brought dairy animals and cheese-making traditions from England, France, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Italy. Early American cheese, I've said before, was fairly practical. Milk spoiled quickly, cheese-making allowed families to preserve nutrients and store food much longer. Most production happened directly on farms using small batches and simple techniques. These were not elaborate cave-aged wheels. They were whatever you could find room in your barn, and maybe you'd store some cheese there as you let it age. Most early American cheeses were simple farmhouse cheddars, fresh cheeses, washed curd styles, and basic Alpine-inspired cheeses. They were designed to be practical foods that could survive difficult seasons and preserve valuable nutrients. The goal was utility, stability, and survival rather than prestige or luxury. This is the same story we've talked about many times around the world. This time, it just happens to be a part of American history. And for much of the early American cheese-making process, women were primarily responsible for cheese-making on farms. Cheese production was part of maintaining the household economy. The recipes or techniques were passed through families and local communities. By the late 1700s and 1800s, regions like New York and New England began developing stronger dairy identities thanks to favorable pasture conditions and expanding agriculture. Cheddar became one of the defining cheeses of early America because it aged well, it transported well, and it adapted easily to larger scale production. Although cheddar originated in England, American producers quickly reshaped it into something distinct. One of the most important figures in American history was Jesse Williams. In 1851, Williams established one of the first successful cheese factories in Rome, New York. Instead of individual farms producing inconsistent cheeses separately, milk from multiple farms could now be pooled together and standardized. This factory model spread rapidly across New York, Wisconsin, and eventually much of the country. American cheese production became more efficient, more profitable, and more scalable. And during this same period, the United States also began developing cheeses of its own. Instead of simply reproducing European traditions exactly, American cheesemakers slowly started adapting those traditions into something distinct and regional. One of the earliest distinctly American cheeses was Colby. Colby was developed in Wisconsin in the late 1800s and named after the town of Colby, Wisconsin. It was created as a softer, milder cousin to cheddar. And unlike cheddar, Colby is washed during production, which changes both the moisture content and the texture. The result is a cheese that is creamier, more open in texture, and generally more approachable. Colby became extremely popular throughout the Midwest and eventually across the country. And later, it helped create one of the most recognizable American cheese combinations, Colby Jack. This was one of the clearest examples of Americans adapting a European tradition, but creating something quite new from it. By the late 1800s, Wisconsin had begun emerging as the center of American cheesemaking. Immigrant cheesemakers played an enormous role in that growth. Swiss immigrants brought Alpine traditions, German immigrants contributed dairy knowledge and washed rind traditions, Italian immigrants introduced mozzarella and Italian style cheesemaking. Entire communities became centered around dairy production. Wisconsin eventually became so connected to cheese and dairy culture that it earned the nickname America's Dairyland. And during this period, another major American cheese style emerged. While Wisconsin was becoming the center of American dairy production in the Midwest, over in California, they were developing a cheesemaking identity of their own on the opposite side of the country. Monterey Jack originated in California. Its roots trace back to Spanish missionary cheese-making traditions, but the cheese later became commercialized and associated with David Jack. Monterey Jack became one of the defining cheeses of the American West. It was mild, very creamy, highly meltable, and it is adaptable to many different uses. Eventually, it spread across the entire country and became internationally recognized. Variations like Pepper Jack helped further cement its popularity. Monterey Jack remains one of the clearest examples of a truly American cheese style, becoming globally successful. Another important American original was brick cheese. Brick cheese originated in Wisconsin through the work of John Jossi in the late 1800s. The cheese got its name from the bricks originally used to press the curds during aging. Young brick cheese is buttery and mild. Aged brick cheese becomes stronger, earthier, and quite a bit more pungent. It became deeply tied to Midwestern food culture and eventually became famous through Detroit-style pizza. At the same time, Wisconsin immigrant cheesemakers also preserved washed rind and Limburger traditions that were fading elsewhere. For a period of time, Wisconsin became one of the last major homes for traditional Limburger production in the United States. As regional cheeses styles continued developing, the American dairy industry itself was also changing rapidly. Improvements in transportation, refrigeration, and industrial food production completely transformed how cheese was made and distributed across the country. The late 1800s and early 1900s transformed American food production completely. Railroads expanded the transportation, and refrigeration technology improved storage and shipping. And cheese changed along the way with all of it. The most famous figure from this era was probably a name you're familiar with, James L. Kraft. In 1916, Kraft patented processed cheese. Processed cheese solved several major problems all at once. It lasted longer, melted consistently, reduced waste, traveled safely, and remained stable during shipping. Those qualities made it incredibly useful during a period when food distribution and industrial production were rapidly expanding across the country. And while processed American cheese is often criticized today, its historical importance is impossible to ignore. It helped make cheese affordable and accessible to millions of people. It also became deeply tied to 20th century American food culture, like cheeseburgers and grilled cheese sandwiches, from diners and macaroni and cheese, and eventually fast food chains that spread across the country and then the world. For many Americans, processed cheese became part of everyday life and one of the defining tastes of modern comfort food. Processed American cheese became one of the most influential cheese products ever created. And despite all the jokes that people make about it, it changed global food culture permanently. Not every American cheese became nationally famous. Some remained deeply regional. One example is cup cheese. Developed among Pennsylvania Dutch communities, cup cheese became known for its soft texture and strong aroma. It never dominated nationally, but it remains an important example of regional American food culture, surviving across generations. Another uniquely American creation is pimento cheese. Pimento cheese is less a single cheese and more a distinctly American cheese spread made from cheese, mayonnaise, and pimentos. It became especially important throughout the American South and remains a staple of Southern food culture today. These regional foods remind us that American cheese culture is not only about award-winning artisan wheels, it is also about comfort food, community traditions, and everyday eating. But by the middle of the 20th century, many Americans had started pushing back against large-scale industrial food systems altogether. And that shift would eventually reshape American cheese once again. By the 1970s and 80s, many Americans had grown frustrated with highly industrialized food systems. They were convenient, but they were growing interest in local agriculture, more handmade food, traditional production methods, regional identity, and the survival of small farms. Many people wanted food that felt more connected to place and craftsmanship rather than large industrial systems. A new generation of cheesemakers began focusing on milk quality, cave aging, raw milk production, and smaller batch cheesemaking. This movement helped create what we now recognize as the American artisan cheese scene. And importantly, American artisans were not simply copying Europe. They were adapting traditions, but building something distinctly American. Some producers focused heavily on European inspired techniques, while others experimented aggressively with mixed milk cheeses, more natural rinds, maybe some washed rinds, unusual aging environments, and entirely new combinations of cultures and making techniques. American cheesemakers became known for their willingness to adapt and experiment rather than strictly follow historical rules and guidelines. American cheesemaking became known for its flexibility and the experimentation that came along with it. That freedom remains one of the defining characteristics of American artisan cheese today. And by the end of the 20th century, the results of that movement were becoming impossible for the rest of the world to ignore. Today, American artisan cheesemakers are respected around the world in a way that would have seemed almost impossible even a few decades ago. For a long time, countries like France, Italy, Switzerland, and England dominated conversations about great cheese. American cheese was often associated primarily with industrial production and processed slices, while Europe carried the reputation for tradition and craftsmanship. Now, that perception began changing dramatically during the late 20th century. As the artisan cheese movement grew, American producers started focusing more heavily on milk quality, traditional techniques, cave aging, and regional identity. At the same time, they also embraced experimentation that many older European systems often could not. Because many European cheeses operate under strict protected rules and historical regulations, American cheesemakers had more freedom to adapt techniques, blend styles, and create entirely new approaches to cheesemaking. Now, that flexibility became part of the greatest strength of American cheese industry. Producers like Rogue River Creamery in Oregon helped prove that American blue cheeses could compete directly against the best cheeses in the world. When Rogue River Blue won international awards, it forced many people to rethink what American cheese was capable of becoming. In California, Cowgirl Creamery helped define the American soft ripened cheese movement, producing cheeses that balanced European inspiration with distinctly American character and milk. Over in Vermont, producers like Jasper Hill Farms helped elevate farmstead cheesemaking and affineur culture in the United States. Their work demonstrated that American producers could create cheeses with the same complexity, seasonality, and sense of place often associated with Europe's most respected traditions. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, Upland's Cheese Company became one of the most celebrated examples of seasonal American farmstead production. Cheeses like Pleasant Ridge Reserve showed that American Alpine-style cheeses could develop their own identity rather than simply imitate European originals. Modern American cheesemaking now exists across an enormous spectrum. The United States still produces massive quantities of industrial cheese every year, but alongside that system is one of the most creative artisan cheese communities in the world. American producers continue experimenting with milk blends, natural rinds, cave aging, washed rind techniques, seasonal production, and hybrid styles that combine traditions from multiple countries. That willingness to explore new ideas while still respecting older traditions has become one of the defining characteristics of modern American cheese culture. Organizations like the American Cheese Society also helped strengthen education, judging standards, competitions, and professional development throughout the cheese industry. Specialty cheese shops, mongers, affineurs, and educators all played important roles in helping American consumers become more engaged with artisan cheese. Today, American cheese exists in multiple worlds at the same time. It includes massive industrial production, small farmstead creameries, regional comfort foods, experimental artisan projects, and internationally awarded cheeses, all operating within the same broader culture. And that diversity may ultimately be the defining feature of American cheesemaking itself. When you step back and look at the full history of American cheese, what stands out most is how constantly it has evolved. The full story of American cheese is not one single tradition. It is a history built over centuries by farmers, immigrants, factory workers, cheesemakers, affineurs, and mongers, all of whom attributed something different to what American cheese would eventually become. Today, American cheese culture includes everything from old farmhouse cheddar traditions to industrial processed cheese, from small regional comfort foods to internationally awarded artisan wheels. It includes the immigrant communities that helped build Wisconsin into America's dairy center. It includes the rise of factory production through people like Jesse Williams and James L. Kraft. It includes the creation of original American cheeses like Colby, Monterey Jack, Brick, and American cheese itself. And in more recent decades, it includes the artisan revival that helped reshape how the world sees American cheese making entirely. Modern producers like Rogue Creamery, Jasper Hill Farm, Cowgirl Creamery, Shelburne Farms, and Uplands Cheese Company helped prove that American cheese could stand alongside some of the most respected cheeses anywhere in the world. American cheese continues to evolve because America has never been tied to a single tradition or single style. American cheesemakers continue experimenting, adapting, and building something new while still respecting the techniques and cultures that came before them. So during this American Cheese Month, I think it's worth taking a moment to appreciate just how broad and diverse American cheese culture has become. All the way from processed slices to cave-aged farmstead wheels, all of it tells a different part of the same story. Now, there are countless dozens and hundreds of other cheeses that could be included in this episode. I try to do just a top few just to highlight some of the special nature of American cheesemakers. So make sure you celebrate this May and every May accordingly. Eat a lot of cheese, preferably from an American cheesemaker. But as long as you're eating cheese, you're doing a good thing. Thank you for listening. My name is Alex, and this has been The Modern Monger.